The first time Eleanor Voss realized she had made a terrible mistake, she was standing in her driveway in a silk bathrobe, watching two sheriff's deputies nail a notice to her front door. It was a cold Wednesday morning in November, the kind of morning where the air bites at your face and every sound carries farther than it should. The birds had gone quiet, the sprinklers were off, and the whole of Wisteria Court, all 14 houses on that little cul-de-sac in Fairview, Georgia, had come outside in the dark to watch. Eleanor's mouth was moving, but no sound came out. On the porch directly across the street, a man sat in a wooden rocker. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and a manila folder on his knee. He wasn't watching the deputies. He was watching the dogwood tree in his front yard, the one his late wife had planted in 1989. He took a slow sip. His name was Master Sergeant Raymond Eugene Calhoun, United States Army, retired. He had been waiting 22 months for this morning. And he was in absolutely no hurry. Let me tell you about Fairview, Georgia. It's not the kind of place you find on a tourist map. It sits about 30 minutes east of Atlanta, tucked between pine forests and red clay roads, the kind of suburb that grew up slowly and quietly, the way good things do. The houses on Wisteria Court were built in the early 1980s, brick ranch homes mostly, with wide front porches and deep backyards and old trees that had been there long before any of the houses were. In the summer of 2019, when this story begins, the cul-de-sac looked the way suburbs are supposed to look. Kids on bikes in the late afternoon, the smell of someone's grill, fireflies after dark, a 4th of July block party that had been running without interruption since 1986. An HOA that mostly existed to settle arguments about paint colors and remind people to trim their hedges before the annual neighborhood inspection. It was peaceful, it was ordinary, it was exactly the kind of place people dream about when they talk about putting down roots. And then, in September of 2019, the house at 14 Wisteria Court sold. Master Sergeant Raymond Eugene Calhoun had lived at 12 Wisteria Court for 31 years. He had served in the United States Army from 1977 to 2004, 27 years in uniform across 3 continents and 2 wars. He had done 2 tours in Germany during the Cold War, watching the wall come down on a grainy television in a barracks in Frankfurt and feeling something he couldn't quite name, not quite joy, not quite sadness, something in between. Then Desert Storm 1991 with the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, rolling through Kuwait in the January heat. Then Kosovo. Then, after September 11th, a year and a half in Afghanistan advising a provincial reconstruction team in Kandahar province before a piece of shrapnel from a roadside device changed the way he walked for the rest of his life. He walked with a cane now, a dark hickory one he'd made himself in the woodworking shop he'd built in his garage after he retired. Woodworking was what he did when his mind needed quiet. Tables, mostly, chairs, one walnut credenza that a neighbor had cried over when she'd seen it. He said it wasn't anything, and he meant it. Raymond Calhoun was 63 years old in the summer of 2019. He had been a widower for 4 years. His wife Patricia had died of ovarian cancer in March of 2015, and the dogwood tree out front, the one she had planted with her own hands in the spring of 1989, was the thing he looked at every single morning when he came out for his coffee. He had refinished the porch boards the summer after she died, and he had not moved the rocking chairs. He was not a loud man. He was not the kind of man who called attention to himself. The children on the street called him Mr. Ray, and he kept a jar of hard candy by the door and let them use his driveway to shoot basketball. He knew the names of every family on the cul-de-sac. He brought food when there was illness and said nothing about it afterward. He also had a notebook on the nightstand next to his bed, a green military-issue memo book, the kind with a hard cover and a small wire spiral. He'd been keeping a daily log since 1979, a habit he'd picked up in basic training. Date, weather, notable events, 3 sentences or 3 pages depending on the day. That notebook would matter later. There was one other thing about Raymond Calhoun that almost nobody knew, and we'll get to that in due time. The house at 14 Wisteria Court had belonged to the Hendersons for 19 years, retired schoolteachers, both of them. They had moved to Savannah to be near their grandchildren, and they had sold the house in August of 2019 to a woman who introduced herself to exactly one neighbor before the moving truck had finished unloading. Her name was Eleanor Voss. She was 41 years old, and she had made her money in real estate development. specifically, the kind of real estate development that involved buying up older residential properties, converting them to short-term rentals, and fighting every zoning board in sight when they pushed back. She drove a pearl-white 2020 BMW X7 with heated seats and a personalized license plate that read EVRULE, which her real estate branding had been built around. Every rule reinvented. That was Eleanor's tagline. The moving truck had barely pulled away when Raymond Calhoun walked across the street with a peach cobbler, the way he did when new neighbors arrived, because that was the kind of man he was. Eleanor Voss answered the door in athleisure and AirPods and looked at the cobbler the way a woman looks at something she does not intend to touch. "I don't eat gluten," she said, "but thanks." She did not ask his name. She closed the door. Raymond stood on her porch for a moment, holding the cobbler. Then he walked back across the street, set it on his own kitchen table, and sat down and cut himself a slice. "Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever met someone in the first 30 seconds and just known? Drop a comment and tell me your story. Because every single person on Wisteria Court would later say the same thing. They knew Eleanor Voss was going to be a problem before the sun set on her first day in that house. Within 2 weeks, she had applied to join the Wisteria Court Homeowners Association. Within 6 weeks, she had gotten herself elected president. The HOA at Wisteria Court had existed since 1983. It had always been a gentle thing, a newsletter, an annual inspection, a holiday decorating contest that nobody took seriously. The dues were $45 a month and went mostly toward lawn maintenance on the common area at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. Eleanor Voss took one look at the HOA and saw a kingdom. Within 30 days of becoming president, she had raised the monthly dues from $45 to $125. She had hired a management company out of Atlanta, Voss Realty Associates, which was in fact her own company, to professionally administer the HOA. She had amended the bylaws to give the HOA president emergency authority to issue fines, arrange towing, and mandate property modifications without a full board vote. The fine schedule she posted on the community board outside was remarkable in its detail. Trash cans visible from the street, $75. Vehicles parked on the street for more than 4 hours, $150. Grass above 3 inches, $200. Basketball hoops in driveways, $100. Raymond Calhoun had a basketball hoop in his driveway. He also, occasionally, parked his 2004 Ford F-150 on the street when he was working in the garage and needed the driveway clear for sawdust. He received his first letter from the HOA on a Tuesday in November 2019. Typed on official letterhead, it informed him that his basketball hoop was in violation of Section 4.3 of the amended bylaws, and that he had 14 days to remove it or face a $100 fine per day. Raymond Calhoun walked across the street, knocked on Eleanor Voss's door, and waited. She answered with her phone in her hand mid-text and did not look up. He introduced himself. Again, he mentioned that the basketball hoop had been in his driveway since 1994 and that the original HOA bylaws had explicitly grandfathered in existing installations. She glanced up from her phone. "The bylaws were amended," she said. "I sent a notice." He told her he had not received a notice about the amendment. She smiled the way people smile when they are not actually smiling. "Sergeant," she said, and she made the word sound like something she'd scraped off her shoe, "this isn't your little army base. Rules apply to everyone here, equally." She closed the door. Raymond stood on the porch for a moment. Then he walked back across the street, went into his house, took his green memo book from the nightstand, and wrote down the date, the time, and everything she had said. Word for word. Direct hit. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be reasonable with someone who had absolutely no interest in being reasonable? Someone who made you feel like your calm was a weakness they could exploit? Drop a comment and tell me what you did, because I want to know. He moved the basketball hoop into his backyard the following Saturday. He did not pay the fine. What happened over the next 14 months on Wisteria Court is the kind of thing that sounds made up. It is not made up. Eleanor Voss ran the HOA like a fiefdom. She levied fines on 7 of the 14 households in the first 3 months of her presidency. She had a code enforcement officer from the city out twice, both times to cite Raymond Calhoun, once for a crack in his driveway apron that had existed since the Clinton administration, and once for a structural irregularity in his fence that turned out to be nothing when the inspector measured it. But the towing was what people remember. In the amended bylaws, Eleanor had included a provision that any vehicle parked on the street in front of any Wisteria Court home for more than 4 hours was subject to towing at the owner's expense. She had contracted with a company called Rapid Response Towing, which, if you search the business registry of Fulton County, Georgia, was also a Voss Realty Associates holding. Raymond Calhoun's F-150 was towed for the first time on a Friday afternoon in December 2019. He had parked it on the street for 4 hours and 20 minutes while he was sawing boards for a dining table he was building for his daughter's family in Macon. He discovered the truck was gone when he came outside and found an empty curb and a thin film of motor oil on the asphalt. It cost him $285 to get it back. He paid it. He noted the date, the amount, and the name of the towing company in his memo book. The truck was towed again in January, then again in February, each time for a violation that lasted barely over the 4-hour mark. Each time the notification was sent to him after the tow had already been called. In March, Eleanor Voss filed a complaint with the HOA board, a board that now consisted of 2 of her friends from her gym and 1 neighbor who had been too afraid to vote against her, claiming that Raymond Calhoun's woodworking shop in the garage was a commercial operation in violation of residential zoning. The complaint went to the city. The city sent a notice. Raymond spent $600 in legal fees, having an attorney write 1 letter explaining that a man building furniture in his own garage was not a commercial enterprise. The complaint was dismissed. That same month, Eleanor towed the truck again. And here is where I have to tell you about the rose bush. Patricia Calhoun had planted a climbing rose bush against the low stone wall at the base of their front steps in the spring of 1993. It was a pale pink variety called Cecil Brunner, and by 2019 it had been there for 26 years. Every May it bloomed. Every summer Raymond pruned it back. Every winter it came back. In April 2020, Eleanor Voss hired a landscaping crew to clear overgrowth along the HOA easement at the front of the properties on Wisteria Court. The easement ran a narrow strip between the street and the sidewalk, technically HOA property on paper. The stone wall with the Cecil Brunner rose bush was not on the easement. But the landscaping crew took it anyway. Raymond Calhoun came home from a grocery run to find the rose bush gone, not trimmed, gone, roots pulled, stone wall partially dismantled. He stood on his front steps for a long time. Then he went inside, made a cup of coffee, and sat at his kitchen table with his phone and his green memo book and began to make some calls. You need to understand what that rose bush meant. Every Mother's Day from 1993 until 2015, Patricia Calhoun had cut 1 bloom from that bush and put it in a small white vase on the kitchen windowsill. When she was in the hospital, Raymond had brought her one in a paper cup. He had told the nurse it was from the garden, and the nurse had not known what that meant, but Raymond had known and Patricia had known, and that was enough. After she died, he had kept the tradition himself. Every Mother's Day, 1 bloom, white vase, kitchen windowsill. Now it was gone. Raymond did not go across the street. He did not call Eleanor Voss. He did not file a complaint with the HOA, which would have been pointless since Eleanor was the HOA. He sat at his kitchen table and he opened his memo book and he wrote 1 line at the bottom of the day's entry. Time to finish this. Eleanor Voss had the truck towed again 2 weeks later, the 5th time, and then a 6th time in July, and after the 6th tow, Raymond did not go pick up the truck for 4 days. He let it sit at the impound lot. He paid the $315 storage and towing fee on a Thursday, drove the truck home, parked it in his garage, and did not take it out again. Direct hit if you think Raymond Calhoun is going to let this go. You've never met a man like Raymond. Stay with me, because here's what nobody knew at the time. The truck stayed in the garage. Raymond started driving his daughter's old Subaru when he needed to go out. The F-150 never left the garage again, not for what Eleanor Voss might have expected. Because Raymond Calhoun had spent those 4 days at the impound lot, not just waiting, He had been making phone calls, writing letters, and most importantly, doing research he had started quietly 9 months before. Here is what nobody on Wisteria Court knew about Raymond Eugene Calhoun. For the last 11 years of his Army career, from 1993 to 2004, Raymond had served not as a line soldier but as a Criminal Investigation Division special agent with the U.S. Army CID. He had investigated fraud, contract corruption, financial crimes within military procurement. He had testified in 17 courts-martial. He had a mind that moved slowly and deliberately in the direction of evidence, the way a river moves toward the sea, patient, inevitable, and impossible to stop once it gets going. His best friend from those years, a man named Colonel Derek Ashworth, retired, was now a senior investigator at the Georgia Secretary of State's office. These were things Eleanor Voss did not know when she decided to pick Raymond Calhoun. But let's talk about what Raymond had actually found. He had started quietly in October 2019, the month after Eleanor became HOA president. He had requested the public records for the HOA bylaws amendment, the one that had expanded the president's authority and raised the dues. He had requested the meeting minutes. He had requested proof of the vote. The vote, it turned out, had not followed the procedural requirements spelled out in the original 1983 HOA charter. The charter required that any amendment to the bylaws be ratified by a 2/3 majority of all homeowners on the street, not just the board. Eleanor had never held that vote. She had simply filed the amendment herself with the county HOA registry. That was finding number 1. Finding number 2. Voss Realty Associates, the management company Eleanor had hired to administer the HOA, was receiving a monthly management fee of $1,800 from HOA funds collected from the 14 homeowners through their dues. Eleanor had not disclosed to any homeowner that the management company was her own company. She had not disclosed the fee amount. She had simply signed a management contract with herself, using HOA funds without a vote. That was a fiduciary breach at minimum. In Georgia, for HOA officers, it had a name under state statute. It was called self-dealing and it carried civil penalties. Finding number 3. Rapid Response Towing, the company that had towed Raymond's truck 6 times, was also Voss Realty Associates Holding. Eleanor had been collecting the towing fees, between $250 and $350 per vehicle, and they were going directly into her own business accounts, not into HOA reserves. She had towed not just Raymond's truck but vehicles belonging to 4 other homeowners on the street, for a total of 17 tows over 14 months. That was $5,250 in towing revenue, off the books, collected under HOA authority, going straight to Eleanor Voss personally. Finding number 4 was the one that mattered most. The rose bush. Raymond had the property survey pulled. He had it pulled in May 2020, the week after the landscaping crew came through, and he had a licensed surveyor walk the property with him. The survey showed clearly that the HOA easement ended 14 inches from the base of his front steps. The stone wall and the rose bush had been 2 feet outside the easement boundary. Eleanor Voss had ordered the destruction of private property. And here's where the Chekhov's gun fires, folks, the one I planted way back at the beginning of this story. Raymond Calhoun had installed a 4K doorbell camera and 2 exterior cameras in November 2019, the week after Eleanor became HOA president. He had documented every tow, every code enforcement visit, every conversation. He had the landscaping crew on camera. He had the crew supervisor pointing at the rose bush, and he had the crew pulling the roots. He had Eleanor Voss standing at the edge of her driveway across the street watching. He had 22 months of footage. He also had something else, something he hadn't told anyone about yet. A quiet conversation with an attorney named Gerald Park at a firm in downtown Atlanta, who specialized in HOA law. Gerald Park had reviewed the bylaws, the meeting minutes, the survey, the towing records, and the management contract over the course of 6 weeks in the spring of 2020. He had reviewed the camera footage. He had pulled Eleanor Voss's business registration records from the Secretary of State. In August 2020, Gerald Park filed a civil complaint in Gwinnett County Superior Court on behalf of Raymond Calhoun and 4 co-plaintiffs, 4 other homeowners on Wisteria Court, who had quietly signed on after Raymond spent 3 patient Saturdays knocking on doors and asking if anyone wanted to talk. The complaint named Eleanor Christine Voss individually and Voss Realty Associates corporately. It alleged fraudulent conveyance of HOA funds, self-dealing, tortious interference with property rights, destruction of private property, and unlawful enrichment through unauthorized towing fees. The total damages sought $847,500 plus attorney's fees, plus a court order dissolving the current HOA board and requiring new elections under proper procedure. And then Raymond Calhoun went home, sat in his rocking chair and waited. He did not tell Eleanor Voss. He did not tell anyone except his daughter and Macon, who said, "Daddy, are you sure?" And he said, "Baby, I was sure 9 months ago." The morning of November 18th, 2020 came in cold and gray, the way November mornings do in Georgia, not quite winter but close enough that you could see your breath, and the sky was the color of old pewter, low and flat over the pines. Raymond Calhoun was up at 5:30, as he always was. He made coffee in the percolator Patricia had bought at a yard sale in 1997, the one that still made better coffee than anything with a pot in it. He put on a flannel shirt and his work boots and his army green canvas jacket. He took his coffee and his hickory cane to the front porch, and he sat in the left rocking chair, his chair, and he listened to the neighborhood wake up. At 7:15, 3 vehicles turned onto Wisteria Court from the main road. The first was a Gwinnett County Sheriff's cruiser. The second was a dark blue sedan carrying Gerald Park and a process server. The third was a white van from a surveying company. They parked in front of 14 Wisteria Court. Raymond Calhoun took a sip of coffee. Eleanor Voss's lights were on. She was up early. She was always up early. Raymond had noticed that over the months. The door opened at 7:22, and Eleanor stepped onto her porch in a silk robe and slippers, holding a cup of something, looking at the vehicles in front of her house with the expression of a person trying to decide if they are still dreaming. She was not dreaming. The process server walked up her front path. He was a pleasant-looking man in his 50s who had done this 1,000 times and had learned to do it with no expression at all. He held out the envelope. He said her name. He said, "You have been served." The deputy nailed the notice to the door behind him, a court-ordered injunction freezing all HOA financial accounts and suspending Eleanor Voss's authority as HOA president pending the outcome of the civil proceedings. Eleanor Voss stood on her porch and said something. Raymond could not hear it from across the street, and it does not bear repeating anyway. Then the surveyor got out of the white van with his equipment, and Eleanor, still in her robe, called a name toward the inside of her house, sharp, urgent, and a man in a t-shirt appeared in the doorway. We will not detail their conversation here. What we will say is that by 8:30 that morning, Eleanor Voss had made 4 phone calls to her attorney, 2 of which went to voicemail. By 9:00 a.m., every person on Wisteria Court was standing on their porch or in their front yard. Nobody said anything to Eleanor. Nobody waved. And here is the moment that people on Wisteria Court still talk about when this story comes up. Raymond Calhoun at 9:07 a.m. on November 18, 2020, stood up from his rocking chair, took his coffee cup inside, came back out, and began, very slowly and very deliberately, to plant a new Cecil Brunner climbing rose bush in the freshly turned earth at the base of his front steps. He had ordered it from a nursery in Gainesville 3 weeks earlier. He had been keeping it in the garage. He planted it in the cold morning air with bare hands, taking his time, not looking across the street once. Direct hit now. Let me pause here and ask you something. What would you have felt watching that, standing on your porch on that cold November morning? Drop a comment because I genuinely want to know what that image does to you. You see, folks, there's a particular kind of silence that falls over a neighborhood after something like this. It's not the silence of emptiness. It's the silence of people having nothing left to say out loud because everything has already been said. The legal proceedings moved forward through the winter of 2020 and into the spring of 2021. Eleanor Voss's attorney filed a motion to dismiss. It was denied. She filed for a change of venue, also denied. Gerald Park, in the meantime, had subpoenaed the Voss Realty Associates financial records, and what he found in those records, the full accounting of management fees, towing revenue, and what appeared to be charges to the HOA reserve fund for Eleanor's personal landscaping, pushed the damages calculation even higher. Eleanor Voss stopped attending the HOA meetings that a court-appointed administrator was now running. She stopped talking to her neighbors. She stopped coming outside much at all. Her white BMW X7 sat in her driveway, and people stopped looking at it the way you stop looking at something you want to forget. In February 2021, Eleanor's attorney reached out to Gerald Park about a settlement. The Wisteria Court plaintiffs, all 5 of them, said no. In April 2021, her attorney reached out again, this time with a more significant offer. They said no again. Raymond Calhoun, in a rare public statement on the matter, told his daughter on the phone, "This was never about the money, but it is also going to be exactly about the money." A moving truck appeared in front of 14 Wisteria Court on a Saturday in May 2021. It was a gray morning, and the azaleas along the street were blooming pink. Eleanor Voss moved boxes out of her house without making eye contact with anyone. Her husband, who had, by most accounts, said almost nothing during this entire saga, carried the furniture. They worked quickly and quietly. Nobody came outside to watch. Nobody waved goodbye. The truck pulled away at 4:40 p.m. By 4:42, the street was quiet again. The case, Calhoun et al. v. Voss and Voss Realty Associates, was settled in Gwinnett County Superior Court in September 2021. The terms of the settlement were partially sealed, but what entered the public record was this. Eleanor Christine Voss and Voss Realty Associates paid a total of $612,000 in damages to the 5 plaintiffs, plus $134,000 in legal fees. The HOA bylaws were rolled back to the 2018 version pre-amendment. The management contract with Voss Realty Associates was voided, and all management fees collected were refunded to the homeowners. The HOA held new elections in October 2021 under proper procedure. Raymond Calhoun was elected the new HOA president by a vote of 13-0. The 14th household abstained because they were on vacation and hadn't gotten the mail in time. He declined the position. He suggested the couple 2 houses down, the Martinezes, who had lived on the street for 11 years and had never given anyone a moment of trouble. They were elected instead, and the HOA newsletter went back to what it had always been, a 1-page note about when the landscapers were coming. The management company fee went back to 0, administered by the homeowners themselves. The dues went back to $45 a month. Eleanor Voss, as of the last public record search, had her Georgia real estate license suspended following a separate state investigation, initiated, it should be noted, by a complaint filed with the Georgia Secretary of State's office by a retired Army CID special agent whose name you already know, with an assist from his friend Colonel Derek Ashworth. The investigation concerned the business practices of Voss Realty Associates across 4 other HOAs where Eleanor had served as management company. That investigation was, as of late 2021, ongoing. And in the spring of 2022, on a warm May afternoon with a light breeze coming through the pines, Raymond Eugene Calhoun cut a single pale pink bloom from the Cecil Brunner climbing rose bush at the base of his front steps. He put it in a small white vase. He set it on the kitchen windowsill in the spot where the sun came through. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his green memo book, and he wrote down the date, the weather, and one sentence. She came back. Let me tell you something about men like Raymond Calhoun. They are not made by one moment. They are made by 10,000 moments, by years of learning when to speak and when to stay quiet, by carrying things that would break other people and choosing not to let those things define them. They are made by a kind of patience that the rest of us mistake for passivity, and an understanding of the long game that the rest of us can only see after it's been played. Eleanor Voss made a mistake that a lot of people make. She looked at a quiet man and saw weakness. She looked at a calm face and decided it meant there was nothing behind it. She looked at an old soldier with a cane and a rose bush and thought, easy target. She was wrong about every single thing she assumed. You see, folks, not every battle is won with noise. Not every war is declared out loud. Some of the most decisive victories in human history were won by people who simply did their homework, kept their records, and waited for the right morning. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man. Never mistake patience for permission. Never mistake kindness for the absence of strength. And never pick a fight with a veteran who has nothing left to lose but his honor, and nothing left to protect but the memory of the woman he loved. Raymond Calhoun didn't go to war with Eleanor Voss, he just went to work. And the rose bush grew back. If you've got a neighbor story, or if this reminded you of someone you know, drop it in the comments right now. And if you know someone who's dealing with a bad HOA situation, share this story with them. Sometimes all you need to know is that it's possible for justice to actually win. We'll see you next time. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.